Nestled on the edge of Hudson Bay in northern Manitoba lies a small town most Canadians would struggle to locate on a map. Its population barely surpasses 800 permanent residents. Isolated from the rest of the country, Churchill has no road connections, and historically, its port has been encased in ice for the majority of the year. The railway that links the town has teetered on the brink of permanent closure for nearly a decade. Today, however, Churchill stands at the center of a major infrastructure decision with profound geopolitical consequences. Plans are underway, and in some cases already financed and committed, to establish a direct Arctic shipping corridor that connects the Canadian interior with the European Union, sidestepping decades-old reliance on American trade routes. If successfully executed, this project would do more than reroute exports. It would fundamentally alter Canada's position in the global economic landscape. To grasp the magnitude of this, one must first understand how Canadian goods move today. The provinces of Saskatchewan and Alberta produce vast quantities of grain, potash, essential minerals, and energy resources. These commodities travel by rail to ports in Canada or through American logistics networks, funneling south or west to Vancouver, Thunder Bay, or Gulf Coast facilities. For generations, Canadian exports have depended on infrastructure that either runs through or alongside the United States. Such arrangements functioned when relations between the two nations were stable. They appear far more precarious now, especially as certain U.S. political leaders openly discuss territory annexation, impose punitive tariffs on Canadian products, and leverage Canada's economic dependence on U.S. networks. It is against this backdrop that Churchill has transformed from a struggling northern outpost into a critical item on the agendas of both federal and provincial governments, European port authorities, and major resource producers across the Canadian West. The Port of Churchill is Canada's only deepwater Arctic port directly linked to the continental rail system. Situated on the southwestern shore of Hudson Bay, the port connects to the town of The Pass, Manitoba, via the Hudson Bay Railway, a line stretching 300 kilometers through boreal forests, muskeg, and permafrost. Geography underpins the strategic argument. Churchill occupies a location along one of the shortest maritime routes from the Canadian interior to northern Europe. Commodities moving from Saskatchewan and Alberta to European markets via Churchill travel significantly shorter distances than they would if routed through southern Canadian ports or the Gulf Coast. This reduction in transit distance trims weeks off delivery times, cuts costs, and most critically, eliminates reliance on American soil. The historical limitation, however, has been the port's brief seasonal window. Shipping operations extend roughly 4 months per year due to the ice conditions of Hudson Bay. Maintaining both the port and railway has required continuous federal support, not for expansion or modernization, but simply to keep operations viable. Since 2018, Canadian federal authorities have invested over $320 million to support the Arctic Gateway Group in sustaining and developing the Hudson Bay Railway and the Port of Churchill. In March 2025, Ottawa announced an additional 5-year funding package totaling $175 million to maintain rail services and initiate preliminary port development. The Manitoba government has also contributed $140.2 million in capital upgrades to the corridor since 2022. In November 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Premier Webb Keenu jointly unveiled a combined federal-provincial investment of $262.5 million, with Premier Keenu separately committing $51 million to upgrade the Hudson Bay Railway to Class 1 standards and construct a new critical mineral storage facility at the port. These numbers, while impressive, only hint at the broader vision. Federal Transport Canada briefing documents describe the Hudson Bay Railway and the Port of Churchill as central to Canada's Arctic sovereignty, and as a strategic gateway for both exports and resupply missions to Nunavut. The full scope of the initiative, officially named the Port of Churchill Plus project, was highlighted by the Federal Major Projects Office in September 2025 as part of transformative strategic priorities. The plan rests on 4 key pillars: elevating the Hudson Bay Railway to Class 1 standards to accommodate heavier freight, deploying dedicated marine ice-breaking capacity to lengthen the shipping season, constructing an all-weather road connecting Churchill to the broader network, and establishing a new energy corridor. Budget 2025 repeatedly emphasized the Port of Churchill Plus as a nation-building initiative, underlining its significance far beyond local development. Meanwhile, on the European side, developments are moving in parallel. In March 2026, during one of the world's largest mining conferences held in Toronto, 2 organizations signed a framework agreement that, on paper, integrates Churchill into one of Europe's most formidable logistics networks. The move signals a tangible shift in transatlantic trade dynamics, positioning Churchill not just as a remote northern outpost, but as a gateway poised to redefine Canada's economic and strategic interactions with the world. The Arctic Gateway Group, a Manitoba-based company owned and operated by Indigenous communities, manages both the Port of Churchill and the Hudson Bay Railway. In a major development, the group signed a formal partnership with the Port of Antwerp-Bruges International, creating a framework for collaboration in port expansion, intermodal transport, and the exploration of new or expanded cargo flows connecting Western Canada with Europe. The agreement highlighted priority sectors including critical minerals, energy commodities, fertilizer, feedstock, containerized shipments, and agricultural products. Antwerp-Bruges is no minor actor on the global stage. In 2025, it handled nearly 300 million tons of cargo, ranking it as the second largest port in the European Union and among the largest worldwide. Serving as a central gateway for energy, bulk commodities, and containerized freight, it links industrial hubs across Germany, France, the Netherlands, and extends into Central and Eastern Europe. By connecting Churchill to Antwerp-Bruges, the Canadian prairies gained direct access to one of Europe's most powerful distribution networks. Chris Avery, president and CEO of Arctic Gateway Group, emphasized at the signing that global observers are increasingly recognizing the value of routing shipments through northern Manitoba. Christoph Watersoet, CEO of the Port of Antwerp-Bruges International, articulated Europe's strategic intent. The European Union is accelerating efforts to secure dependable and sustainable sources of critical raw materials, energy, and agricultural inputs essential to its industrial base and the clean energy transition. Watersoet cited the EU's Critical Raw Materials Act of 2024 and the Clean Industry Deal of 2025 as concrete examples of the legal and policy frameworks designed to diversify supply chains for industries that depend on battery manufacturing, renewable energy infrastructure, aerospace, and defense production. These frameworks are not merely symbolic. They represent binding policies aimed at reducing European dependence on any single supplier or geographic transit route. A lesson painfully reinforced after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 disrupted the export of agricultural commodities from two of the world's largest grain-producing nations simultaneously. Over the past 3 years, European industrial buyers have actively restructured supply relationships across food, energy, and industrial materials. Canada, with its political stability, rule of law, and a resource base spanning grain, potash, critical minerals, and energy, fits precisely the profile Europe is seeking in a diversified, reliable supplier. Arctic Gateway Group is evaluating the feasibility of operating Churchill as a year-round port rather than a seasonal 4-month facility. This study is being conducted in partnership with FedNav, a Montreal-based maritime transport company with extensive Arctic shipping expertise. The assessment focuses on tangible and technical questions. The necessary mix of ice-breaking vessels, port upgrades, and rail enhancements required to extend Churchill's operating season from 4 months toward a full 12. Hudson Bay's ice conditions are harsh and dynamic, but shifting Arctic temperatures are altering ice patterns in ways that may naturally lengthen the shipping window without human intervention. The convergence of infrastructure investment and environmental change creates a rare opportunity for a northern shipping corridor to function year-round for the first time. The Port of Churchill Plus initiative has also captured attention from commodity producers across Western Canada. According to Arctic Gateway Group, the port now boasts 3 times the critical mineral storage capacity it had in 2024 and has successfully completed 2 consecutive seasons of shipments to Europe. Saskatchewan's potash industry, given Canada's status as the world's largest potash producer and the element's central role in agricultural fertilizer, has a direct stake in alternative export paths. Western Canadian grain producers share similar interests. Routes through Hudson Bay offer a substantially shorter voyage to European markets than either the Pacific route to Asia or southern pathways through the United States, delivering product directly to some of the world's largest consumer markets. The ownership model of Arctic Gateway Group is notable and distinctive. The port and railway are operated by a consortium of First Nations and community partners, who assumed control in 2018 after catastrophic flooding threatened permanent railway closure. By 2021, all remaining corporate shares were transferred to One North, solidifying Indigenous and community ownership. In January 2026, former Assembly of First Nations National Chief Ovid McCready joined the board of Arctic Gateway Group. This governance structure embeds operating a year-round shipping corridor through Hudson Bay is not simple. It requires ice-breaking capacity on a scale that currently does not exist. The Hudson Bay Railway snakes through permafrost terrain, which has historically caused service interruptions. Upgrading it to handle Class 1 heavy freight in such conditions is a major technical challenge. Building a genuinely continuous export route for grain, critical minerals, and energy commodities demands infrastructure investments reaching into the billions of dollars, far beyond the hundreds of millions committed so far. Ambitions for Churchill's expansion have also raised environmental concerns. Among the plans under discussion are pipelines linking Churchill to Western Canadian energy production. Environmental organizations and researchers have flagged documented risks regarding the ecological sensitivity of the Hudson Bay watershed and the potential impacts of large-scale industrial development in an ecologically complex region. Equally pressing is the question of commercial viability. Churchill has historically relied on federal support merely to remain operational. Transforming it into a major international trade corridor will require not only infrastructure investment, but consistent cargo volume, long-term shipper commitments, durable supply contracts, and dependable transport throughput to justify the enormous capital expenditure. The Antwerp-Brugge Agreement represents a framework for collaboration, not a guarantee of cargo volumes. Studies evaluating the viability of year-round shipping are still underway, and no private entity has yet committed the full capital needed for the expansion. What has been formally signed, funded, and endorsed is the blueprint of intent. Institutional partnerships, feasibility studies, government commitment letters, and framework agreements that lay the groundwork for any major infrastructure project. Consider the developments of the past 18 months. The federal government allocated $175 million over 5 years for maintenance and preliminary development. Manitoba has contributed an additional $87.5 million in provincial funding. The Port of Churchill Plus was officially added to the federal list of transformative national strategies. Ottawa also commissioned a market-sounding study to gather industry input on the long-term growth potential of the Churchill Corridor. Meanwhile, the port tripled its critical mineral storage capacity and completed 2 consecutive export seasons, sending minerals to Europe. The operator of Canada's only Arctic deepwater port has signed a formal partnership with Europe's second-largest port. None of this existed a mere 18 months ago. Some of it was barely even conceived as a concept. The pace of institutional development around Churchill is unprecedented in the port's nearly 100-year history. It is important to distinguish between what is new and what is being restored. The Port of Churchill opened in 1931 and spent most of the following 90 years exporting grain. In 1997, the federal government sold it to an American company, Omnitrax, for $10. That company operated the port until a catastrophic flood in 2017 severed the railway, leaving Churchill isolated without ground transport for more than a year. The rescue of the port and railway by an Indigenous and community-led consortium in 2018 appeared at the time as a long-shot act of Northern solidarity. In reality, it preserved a strategically valuable asset that the federal government had yet to fully recognize and that the market was about to rediscover. The port and railway, which Canada had allowed to deteriorate for decades, sold for almost nothing, nearly wiped out by flooding, are now at the center of a formal partnership with Europe's second-largest port, a federal nation-building designation, and a multi-hundred-million-dollar joint government investment program. Manitoba. Premier Wabkinyu described the corridor as Canada's sole hope should American geopolitical pressure on Arctic territory intensify. There is only one port and one rail line feeding the Arctic in Canada, he said, and that is Churchill in Manitoba. Otis Transport Canada briefing materials echo this perspective, identifying the Port of Churchill as integral to Arctic sovereignty and the Hudson Bay Railway as the only year-round surface transport option for several remote communities. Those communities, including Inuit populations in Nunavut's Kivalliq region, totaling 11,000 people, rely on this infrastructure for essential freight and basic resupply. The case for Churchill has always been part humanitarian, part strategic. For the first time in decades, it is also commercially significant. Chris Avery, CEO of Arctic Gateway Group, put it plainly, the Port of Churchill is still in the process of being rebuilt, with the potential to become larger than ever before. The agreement with the Port of Antwerp-Brugge is not the final destination. It represents the latest formal institutional milestone on a trajectory being constructed in real time, backed by real government funding, authentic port partnerships, and tangible European demand, toward a trade corridor connecting the Canadian interior with the European Union through the Arctic. Bypassing the American infrastructure Canada has relied upon for more than a century. Whether this corridor ultimately achieves year-round shipping, Class 1 rail capability, energy pipelines, and billions in private investment depends on decisions yet to be made and capital yet to be committed. What is undeniable is that Canada is now actively building it. The EFF, please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.